In this section, we're going to talk about how to style images using Bootstrap. So I have here an image that has a width of 500 pixels. And one of the challenges with images is that when we set the width to something like this, 500 pixels, it makes that width of the image fixed, meaning that regardless of the size of the viewport, it's always going to be 500 pixels wide, even if the viewport is less than 500 pixels wide. But of course, we know Bootstrap is designed to make our web pages mobile responsive, so there ought to be some classes that can also make our images responsive to the size of the viewport. And indeed there are. The first class is simply called image responsive. And this is going to set the image so that its width by default is 500 pixels if our viewport is at least 500 pixels wide. But as soon as our viewport becomes narrower than 500 pixels, it's going to set the width of the image to just be 100% of the viewport. That way the image is responsive to the size of the viewport. There's another class we can add to an image which is called center block. And this will center the image for us. So let's go to our browser to see how each of these classes affect our images on our web page. Because the width of our viewport is at least 500 pixels wide, our image takes up the full 500 pixels that were specified in the width of our image element. And our center block class ensures that the image is centered in our viewport. Now let's see what happens as we start to shrink the size of our viewport. We can see that the center block class continues to keep the image centered in our viewport, and eventually as our viewport becomes less than 500 pixels wide, we'll see that the image takes up 100% of the width of the viewport and shrinks proportionally. This is pretty awesome. We can now make all of our images responsive to the width of a viewport simply by adding a class available to us from the Bootstrap framework. But these aren't the only image-related classes Bootstrap provides us. Remember a few lessons back when we talked about how to style images to be round in CSS? Well, Bootstrap provides a class that does that for us as well. It's called the image circle class. And not only that, but Bootstrap also has classes that can make our images have rounded corners as well as look like a thumbnail. Let's go back into our browser to see the effect that each of these has on our image. Very cool. The image circle class makes our image into a circle, the image rounded class makes each of the corners of our image round, and the image thumbnail class gives a nice little border to our image that makes it look like a thumbnail.